Do you know what I was? How I lived? You know what despair is. Then winter should have meaning for you. I did not expect to survive. Earth suppressing me. I didn't expect to waken again, to feel in damp earth my body able to respond again, remembering after so long how to open again in the cold light of earliest spring. Afraid, yes, but among you again, crying, yes, risk, joy, in the raw wind of the new world. Hello and welcome to Words That Burn, the podcast taking a closer look at poetry. This will be the first episode of 2025 and should be coming to you on New Year's Day. It is suitably centered around the poem Snowdrops by renowned American poet Louise Gluck. The snowdrop is a flower that blooms against all odds in January, and was an opportunity to cover a poet I'd been wanting to feature for a very long time. Louise Gluck was a huge figure in the poetry world, even winning the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2020. At the time, judges praised her unmistakable poetic voice that with austere beauty makes individual existence universal. This is high praise for her unmistakable poetic voice. It is a rather apt summation of her journey as a poet. This is especially true as in her early career she was often compared with the likes of Sylvia Plath and Anne Sexton. But with time, Gluck would distinguish herself as a truly unique poetic voice. Her work frequently used a broad swathe of poetic techniques refined to their sharpest point. Those points come in the form of a delicate balance of contradictions: stoicism and vulnerability, austerity and expansiveness. Her language is precise yet evocative, inviting readers to confront both sorrow and beauty in life. The emotional depth of her work lies in its ability to hold opposing forces, such as grief and hope, ultimately revealing moments of transformation, even amid loss. That notion of transformation is at the core of this poem. As for themes, her poetry digs deeply into the human experience, focusing on grief, transformation, and the fragile nature of existence. Her work often draws on nature and mythology to explore and interpret concepts of life, death, and renewal. One of the most distinctive features of her poetry is her treatment of death, not as a definitive ending, but as a point of transition. In her poems, natural imagery such as flowers, water, and landscapes symbolize the interconnectedness of loss, memory, and renewal. She often conveys a sense that every ending holds the seed of a beginning, constantly emphasizing the cycles of rebirth that we see in the everyday. This notion that every ending holds the seed of a beginning could not be more apt for this poem, Snowdrops. It is written almost entirely from the point of view of the titular flower, explaining its own re-emergence into the world. The reason that I've chosen this poem for the beginning of the year is held in this idea of rebirth. For me, the New Year's event, which we've all just seen the back of, seems to be treated, at least in Western societies, as a hard reboot, a precipice of pure aspiration and anticipation. The dreaded word resolution gets thrown around at gatherings and people rattle off lists of soon-to-be accolades as long as your arm. Any reflection that is done seems to focus on what we haven't achieved or managed yet. All this culminates in turning January into a bit of a pressure cooker for self-improvement. Whilst I have nothing against striving to improve, I think that the lack of reflection takes a lot from us. We rarely view our years as a record of accomplishment. Instead, we all can't wait for the new year to start. It should probably, as I hope this poem might prove, be the other way around. The first stanza of this poem covers much of what makes Gluck's verse so unique. It is stark, bleak, and yet somehow distinctly human. It is made up of 3 lines. Do you know what I was? How I lived? You know what despair is? Then winter should have meaning for you. We as the audience are immediately engaged by a rhetorical question and establish a mystery around our speaker. Do you know what I was? How I lived? We know then that perhaps our speaker isn't human because of what, and we know that their life probably wasn't born by the question of how I lived. These questions are immediate and hook us quickly. We can assume from the title of the poem that it is possibly the snowdrops themselves who are speaking to us. Snowdrops, or galanthus by their Latin name, are those tiny brilliant blooms of white that pop up in the shade and the deep cold of winter. They hold in them a wonderful contradiction. Despite their fragile and delicate appearance, they are in fact remarkably hardy and thrive in conditions that few other plants could survive. I genuinely believe that a poet who loved contradictions as much as Louise Gluck would have admired these tiny little flowers. Their unusual blooming period, from January to March, has led them to becoming a favoured symbol for both death and renewal in many folktales around the world. It's no wonder then that Gluck has penned a poem on rebirth with snowdrops at the centre. From the initial questions we are met with a definitive statement. You know what despair is. This is striking compared to the gentle probing questions we just heard. There is a certainty in this statement, both from the snowdrops and Gluck herself, that anyone listening has experienced despair. Because to live is to experience turmoil in one form or another. Cannot be avoided. With that certainty established, another can soon follow. Then winter should have meaning for you. Winter and hardship are synonymous with one another in the Western canon of literature. And so to know despair is to understand winter. There seems to be a universal kinship established between all living things in this simple connection. Everything knows the trials of winter. Hardship is universal, be it for animals or plants, at this time of year. You would not be called dramatic for calling this opening stanza quite bleak. A bleak subject matter always seemed to be at the heart of Gluck's work. Her canon is one of loss, mortality and grief. The sense of near despair was often compounded by the poet's unique ability to detach or remove her speaker from a scene, making it feel as though it was being observed from afar. You would think that this type of alienating coldness might make it difficult for Gluck to find an audience. But in fact it seemed to magnetize readers to her work instead. I think it's because at the core of most of her work, Gluck was relaying a true human experience with a near violent clarity that ensured it could be understood but always stopped short of being cruel or callous. This poem, however, feels much more intimate. The opening stanza has an almost conversational feel to it, as the speaker moves from rhetorical questions to simple statements, each one flowing after the other, mimicking a chat. It is the small sliver of hope in all her work that takes centre stage in the second stanza. Now the poem's structure moves from the broad, almost conversational lines of the first stanza to a stacked series of shorter lines. I did not expect to survive, earth suppressing me. I didn't expect to waken again, to feel in damp earth my body able to respond again, remembering after so long how to open again in the cold light of earliest spring. The speaker, the snowdrops, are recounting their trauma here, and Gluck plays with form, technique and repetition to allow a little spike of panic to enter the poem. The speaker is describing the natural cycle of growth experienced by most plants, but it is humanized in the extreme by this panic. The lines flow short and freely thanks to enjambment. I did not expect to survive, earth suppressing me. I didn't expect to waken again, to feel in damp earth my body. We understand from these lines that Gluck is hinting at more than plants in this poem. This notion of doubt is a common one after hardship. We wonder if life can ever truly be the same after a trauma, after life or the earth has suppressed us. We too might never expect to awaken again. This could be brought on by anything: the loss of a relationship, a loved one, even a job. Humans are constantly forced to confront their own supposed nadirs, their lowest points, and turn to nihilism on occasion. The loss of any and all belief can often seem the only option. Faced with this kind of prospect, it's no wonder that we wouldn't expect to feel our bodies, turning instead to numbness as a kind of awful protection. It is a testament to Gluck's mastery of emotion and technique that we can so easily connect the humble Snowdrops experience to our own. Even without this podcast, I reckon that anyone listening would feel a kinship with the abstract image of the snowdrop emerging. They would feel the prickle of panic, as Gluck intended. Hopelessness, as we've already said, is not Gluck's sole domain, however. And as the stanza continues using the same techniques of enjambment and structure, the panic we feel turns to pure relief. Able to respond again, remembering after so long how to open again in the cold light of earliest spring. Here is a portrait of human and plant resilience. The numbness of trauma is thawing, and the snowdrops find themselves able to respond again. They remember how to open and be vulnerable again, to risk connection with the outside once more. That risk is acknowledged in the light. It is cold, not warm, not something endlessly positive. It is a risk, and that should always be at the forefront of the reader's mind. There is a gentle repetition of the words again in this stanza, a subtle reminder of the idea of rebirth and renewal by Gluck as the earliest spring approaches. Gluck has no interest in prescribing the exact nature of what she is working through, but rather leaves it open to the individual reader as to what it could be. She lets their grief resonate with the poem in its own way. The hope she hints at in this poem is not some sanitized Hallmark movie or Disney happy ending, but rather is far more like the snowdrop itself. Small, yet resilient. The final 3 lines of the poem do not promise that hardship will never happen again. They instead recognize survival and the risk of trying again. Afraid, yes, but among you again, crying, yes. Risk, joy, in the raw wind of the new world. Repetition returns with a new word, yes. Every use is a recognition and commitment. Afraid, yes, but among you again. This couplet stanza is as direct as anything Gluck has written. A direct voice was always at the heart of her work. She strips back the natural syntax of English, paring it down to its bare bones. Afraid, yes. Crying, yes. Risk, joy. Even punctuation falls away to ensure that readers are struck by the pure emotion and risk of it all. It is the peril and promise of a new start in its most instinctual form. Gluck enhances the impact of this blow with the use of caesura, a pause within a line of verse to regulate the flow and pace of her language. This couplet continues the message of the second stanza. It stands alone, so we are forced to slow down and reflect on it individually. The technique is used one last time for the final line, in the raw wind of the new world. It hits like the gust of cold, raw wind, just as the poem describes. For the snowdrop, this is a brand new world. But like the old one, there are plenty of risks. We know as readers, though, that the snowdrop is well built for this. It thrives in the raw winds of a new world. And so, in Gluck's gorgeous metaphor for human resilience, we know that all of us can thrive there too. To call this a typical message of hope would be a lie. It embodies Louise Gluck's talent for stark truth and uncomfortable humanity wholly. It acknowledges, without false promise or flowery softening, that the heart of change and growth is hardship. This is not always the case, but it's a proven catalyst. Gluck parlays this eloquently and simply with one of her favourite forms of allegory, nature. She transforms an often overlooked plant into a testament to quiet hope. More than that, she does all this by recognising that we are the sum of everything we've done before, the good and the bad. As we enter this new year, it's easy to want that blank slate, that tabula rasa effect, but to ignore everything you've overcome and hope to start again would be a mistake. You're still standing. It's easy to feel after the year that was 2024 that you shouldn't be, but you are. Remembering your hardships and understanding you overcame them can be everything you need to keep going, even if a new start is what you're aiming for. Gluck's poem reminds us that there is no such thing as a new beginning, but rather a continuation. Survival is what should be revelled in. To continue is an achievement. My favourite part of this poem is that the snowdrops are not demonized for their taking time to rest. Anytime we go through a difficulty, we are knocked back. And in today's busy culture, it can feel as though we have to take that in our stride. This is not the case. We can be buried in the earth, we can retreat, we can hide. And yet, we will be given a chance to keep going. There is no shame in taking a breather. January can feel as though we have to surge out the gate and gallop to the finish line. That's not the case. You can take a moment, like the snowdrop, and emerge when you're ready. You might even take yourself by surprise. I'd like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for listening to Words That Burn last year. I received so much wonderful support over the course of 2024 and managed to interview some amazing guests as well. I really appreciate all the comments, reviews and messages that you've sent in. I'm looking forward to bringing you even more in 2025, and I hope that all of you have a solid start to the new year. But what did you think of this poem? As always, this is my interpretation and I'd love to hear yours. If you'd like to get in touch with me, there are a few ways to do so. You can reach me directly by email at wordsthatburnpodcast@gmail.com. You can get in touch through the podcast website www.wordsthatburnpodcast.com. I'm on Twitter or X at Words That Burn, and I'm now on Blue Sky at Words That Burn, so you can follow me there as well. I'm also on Instagram at Words That Burn Podcast and TikTok at Words That Burn 2. If you have any poems you'd like to hear covered on this podcast, or if you think there's a particular topic you'd like to hear regarding poetry covered overall, I'd love to hear it. I'd also love to hear what you're reading at the minute and what you think other people should be reading as well. If you'd like to read the script for this week's podcast, complete with citations and sources, check the Substack link in the description. If you enjoyed the episode or know someone who might, consider sending it to them directly or leaving me a review wherever you listen. Words That Burn is written and produced by me, Benjamin Colopy. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast once again.